Elena Voss ran through the dark trees with her heart slamming against her ribs, the sound of heavy paws crashing through the underbrush behind her. She had less than a minute before they caught her scent again. Her bare feet tore against roots and stone, but she did not slow down. Somewhere behind her, in the direction of the pack house, alarms were ringing through the night air, and she knew that within moments, the entire Blackthorn territory would be searching for her. She was not running from strangers, she was running from her own home. 3 months earlier, none of this would have seemed possible. Elena had been the chosen mate of Damien Blackthorn, the most powerful alpha king the Northern Territories had seen in 2 generations. Their bond had been the strongest anyone in the pack had ever witnessed, a connection so deep that elders spoke of it as something out of old legend. She had been happy, she had been loved, and she had been, for the first time in her life, safe. That safety had shattered on a rainy evening when a stranger appeared at the edge of the territory, calling herself an emissary of the Ashgrave Pack, one of the oldest rival packs in the region. The woman had not come with an army or with threats shouted in the open. She had come quietly, and she had found Elena alone near the eastern stream, where Elena often went to think. "You carry something valuable," the woman had said, her eyes flicking briefly to Elena's stomach. "Something the Ashgrave Pack wants." Elena had not yet told anyone that she was pregnant. Not even Damien. She had only confirmed it herself 2 days before, using an old remedy her grandmother had taught her, one that reacted to the scent of a wolf's blood. She had been planning to tell him that very night, over dinner, when the stars were out and the whole world felt soft and new. Instead, she had learned that her unborn child was already a target. The woman explained, in a voice as calm as still water, that the Ashgrave Pack had been waiting for generations for a chance to weaken the Blackthorn bloodline. A child born from the union of Damien and Elena would carry power beyond anything seen in decades, and the Ashgrave elders could not allow that power to grow unchecked. Their plan was simple and cruel. They would force Damien into an arranged alliance marriage with the Ashgrave heir, using threats against the unborn child to make him comply. If Elena refused to disappear, if she stayed and let the truth be known, the Ashgrave assassins would find a way to end the pregnancy before it ever came to term, and no wall or guard could stop them, because the threat would come from within, disguised among trusted faces. "You have 2 paths," the woman had said. "Stay, and mourn a child before it is born, while your alpha is torn between his people and his heart. Or leave, quietly, and raise your child somewhere our reach cannot easily follow. Either way, your happiness here is already gone." Elena had wanted to scream, to run straight to Damien and tell him everything, to trust in his strength the way she always had. But she had grown up watching her own mother's pack destroyed by an enemy who struck from the shadows, using loved ones as weapons against each other. She knew that love was not always enough to stop betrayal, and that sometimes the only way to protect something precious was to take it far away from the people who wanted to use it as a weapon. So she made the hardest decision of her life alone. For weeks, she pretended nothing was wrong. She smiled at pack dinners. She let Damien pull her close at night and whisper about the future, about names for children they had not yet decided to have, about a life together that stretched on forever. Every night, guilt ate at her chest like acid, but she said nothing, because she knew that the moment she told him the truth, he would try to fight the entire Ashgrave Pack himself, and she could not watch him destroy himself for a war he could not win quietly enough to keep their child safe. She prepared in secret. She learned which roads left the territory without passing through checkpoints. She found a contact, an old friend of her mother's, who knew how to erase a person from every registry a pack might use to track her. She saved money in small amounts so no one would notice, and on the night she finally left, she stood in the moonlit courtyard where she and Damien had shared their first real conversation, and she waited for him, because she could not leave without seeing him one last time. He found her there, sensing something wrong through the bond they shared, a thread of feeling that connected them no matter the distance. His golden eyes had searched her face in the moonlight, worry etched into every line of his expression. "Elena," he had said, reaching for her hand. "What's wrong? I feel like something is breaking." She had wanted to fall into his arms and tell him everything. Instead, she made herself hold back tears and forced a small, sad smile. I have to go, she told him. Please don't ask me why tonight. Just know that I am not leaving because I stopped loving you. His face had gone pale, his grip on her hand tightening as if he could hold her there by force of will alone. Then explain it to me. Whatever it is, we can face it together. That is what a bond means, Elena. You do not have to carry anything alone. Not this, she had whispered, pulling her hand gently from his. Not this time. She had turned to leave, her bag already over her shoulder, when she stopped and looked back at him one final time. She saw a king who had built walls of strength around an entire pack, standing utterly undone in front of her, and it broke something inside her chest that she knew would never fully heal. I still love you, she said softly. I need you to remember that, no matter what happens next. Then she ran. She had known he would not chase her that night, not truly, because some deep part of him understood that if she was leaving, despite everything between them, there had to be a reason powerful enough to override even their bond. He let her go because he trusted her, even in the middle of his own heartbreak, and that trust was the only reason her plan worked at all. But leaving the territory was not simple. Word had spread quickly that the Alpha King's mate had disappeared without warning, and rumors began to twist the story into something ugly, whispers of betrayal and abandonment circling through the pack like smoke. Patrol wolves who did not know the truth began searching the borders out of loyalty to their alpha, assuming she might be in danger, and trying to bring her home. That was how she found herself running through the trees that night, chased not by enemies, but by well-meaning wolves who did not understand that catching her would undo everything she was trying to protect. She reached the old stone marker at the edge of the territory, just as the first patrol wolf broke through the tree line behind her. She did not look back. She crossed the boundary line, feeling the invisible pull of the pack bond stretch and strain inside her chest, a physical ache that made her stumble. On the other side, in neutral land where pack laws could not follow, she finally allowed herself to stop and breathe. Her mother's old friend was waiting exactly where he promised he would be, in a car with no markings, its headlights off. He did not ask questions. He simply opened the door and waited for her to climb inside. As the car pulled away from everything she had ever known, Elena pressed a hand to her stomach and made herself a quiet promise. She would protect this child no matter the cost. She would build a life far from danger, far from politics, far from packs and thrones and ancient rivalries. And someday, when it was safe, she would find a way to make things right. She did not know, as the car disappeared into the darkness, that it would be 5 long years before she saw Damien Blackthorne again, and that when that day finally came, neither of them would be ready for what it revealed. Behind her, in the courtyard where they had said goodbye, Damien stood alone under the stars long after she was gone, his hand still curled around the space where hers had been, whispering her name into the night as if saying it enough times might somehow bring her back. He did not yet know about the child. He only knew that the other half of his heart had walked away, and that some instinct deep inside him, older than reason, told him this was not truly the end of their story. It was only the beginning of a much longer, much harder one, and it would take years before the pieces scattered that night would find their way back together again. The car ride away from Blackthorne territory lasted 3 days, though Elena remembered very little of it beyond the blur of highways and gas station lights. Marcus, her mother's old friend, drove without asking questions, stopping only when necessary, always choosing routes that avoided major cities where a tracking wolf might catch a scent trail. By the time they reached the small coastal town of Millbrook, Elena felt like a different person than the one who had left the courtyard days before. Millbrook was quiet in a way that felt almost unreal after years of pack life. There were no alpha hierarchies here, no territorial disputes, no constant hum of wolves moving through the trees at the edge of hearing. It was a town of fishermen and shopkeepers, of humans who noticed nothing strange about a young woman renting a small cottage near the edge of town and keeping mostly to herself. Marcus helped her set up a new identity before he left, one built carefully enough to withstand scrutiny. Elena Voss became Elena Marsh, a recently widowed veterinary assistant looking for a fresh start. The paperwork was flawless, the kind that only someone with deep connections could arrange, and Elena never asked exactly how Marcus managed it. She simply thanked him, watched him drive away, and turned to face the empty cottage that would become her home. The first months were the hardest. She missed the pack more than she expected, not the politics or the danger, but the small things. The warmth of a shared meal with people who understood her nature. The comfort of knowing someone was always nearby if trouble came. The particular hum of belonging to something larger than herself. In Millbrook, she was alone in a way she had never been before, and some nights, the isolation pressed down on her chest like a physical weight. But she was not truly alone. With each passing week, her body changed, and she began to feel the small flutter of movement that told her someone else was growing inside her, someone who depended entirely on her strength to survive. That thought became her anchor. Whenever grief threatened to pull her under, she pressed a hand to her stomach and reminded herself why she had left everything behind. She found work at a small veterinary clinic on the edge of town, run by an older woman named Diane, who never asked too many personal questions, and seemed to sense, without being told, that Elena was running from something. Diane taught her the practical skills of the trade, patience with animals that could not explain their pain, calm hands during emergencies, and a quiet kind of confidence that had nothing to do with wolves or packs at all. Elena discovered she was good at the work, and more than that, she found a strange peace in it. Healing creatures who trusted her without question felt like a small redemption for the family she had been forced to break. The baby came on a stormy night in early spring, nearly 6 weeks earlier than expected. Elena labored alone in the small hospital of the nearby town, gripping the hand of a kind nurse who stayed with her through the worst of it, since Diane had been away visiting family, and there was no one else to call. When her daughter finally arrived, small and fierce and screaming into the world, Elena wept harder than she had allowed herself to since the night she left Damien standing in that courtyard. She named her daughter Wren, after a small, resilient bird her grandmother used to point out on quiet mornings, a creature that survived harsh winters through sheer determination despite its size. It felt fitting. This child had already survived threats before she was even born, and Elena intended to make sure she kept surviving, no matter what came next. As Wren grew, it became clear almost immediately that she was not an ordinary child. Her eyes, a striking shade of amber that matched no one on Elena's side of the family, seemed to see more than a normal infant should. She rarely cried, even as a newborn, watching the world instead with a quiet, careful attention that unsettled some of the nurses at the hospital. By the time she was 2 years old, she could sense storms before they arrived, growing restless and alert, hours before the first clouds gathered on the horizon. By 4, she had once calmed an aggressive stray dog in the clinic parking lot, simply by kneeling in front of it and speaking softly, an act that left Diane staring at her with open astonishment. Elena watched these moments with a mixture of pride and fear. She recognized the signs, the early markers of a wolf's power awakening far sooner and far stronger than usual. Wren was not simply a child born of 2 wolves. She was the heir to one of the most powerful alpha bloodlines in generations, exactly as the Ashgrave emissary had warned all those years ago, and every instinct in Elena's body told her to keep that truth as buried and as quiet as possible for as long as she could manage. She taught Wren, gently and carefully, how to blend in among humans, how to control the flashes of unusual strength that sometimes surprised even Elena, how to keep her heightened senses hidden behind an ordinary, cheerful smile. Wren, remarkably patient for a child her age, seemed to understand on some instinctive level that this was important, even if she did not fully grasp why. Life in Millbrook settled into a careful, protected rhythm. Elena worked at the clinic during the days, picked Wren up from the small local school in the afternoons, and spent evenings teaching her daughter both ordinary lessons and quiet control exercises disguised as games. She built friendships cautiously, keeping enough distance to protect her secrets, while still allowing herself small moments of human connection. She dated occasionally, though never seriously, always aware that any relationship built on hidden truths was destined to remain shallow. She thought about Damien more often than she wanted to admit. Late at night, after Wren had fallen asleep, Elena would sometimes sit by the window and let herself remember the warmth of his hands, the low, steady sound of his voice, the way he used to look at her, as though she were the answer to a question he had been asking his entire life. She wondered whether he had moved on, whether some other woman now stood beside him, as Luna of the Blackthorn pack, and the thought sent a familiar ache twisting through her chest each time. She told herself these thoughts were a weakness she could not afford. Whatever she once had with Damien belonged to a different life, one she had chosen to leave behind for the sake of their daughter's safety. Dwelling on it only made the ache worse, and served no purpose beyond reopening a wound that needed to stay closed. Still, some nights, she caught herself wondering if the threads of their bond, weakened by distance but never fully broken, still stretched between them across all those miles. She wondered if he ever felt her, the way she sometimes swore she could feel him, a faint warmth at the edge of her senses on quiet, still nights. She told herself it was only her imagination, a trick of grief and longing. She had no way of knowing that, hundreds of miles away, Damien Blackthorne sat awake on those very same nights, staring out over his territory, certain beyond all logic that somewhere out there, she was thinking of him too. 5 years passed this way, quiet and careful, each day building the fragile, ordinary life Elena had fought so hard to create. She allowed herself, slowly, to believe that perhaps they had truly escaped. Perhaps the danger had faded with time, and perhaps someday, when Ren was older and stronger, Elena could find a way to let their old world back in on her own terms. She did not yet know that danger had never fully lost their trail, and she did not yet know that fate, patient and relentless, was already drawing Damien Blackthorne toward the quiet streets of Millbrook, closer with every passing week, until the day their paths would finally, unavoidably, cross again. Damien Blackthorne had not slept a full night in 5 years. He ruled the largest and most powerful pack in the Northern Territories with a steady, unshakable hand, but the throne felt hollow without the woman who was supposed to sit beside him. In the years since Elena disappeared, he had built a reputation as a fair but distant leader, respected by his people and feared by his enemies, yet those who knew him best could see the emptiness behind his eyes that no amount of success could fill. He had searched for her, at first with the full force of the Blackthorne network, calling in favors from allied packs, hiring trackers who specialized in finding wolves who did not want to be found. Every lead ended in silence. It was as if Elena Voss had simply ceased to exist the moment she crossed the territory line, and for a wolf whose senses could track a scent across miles of forest, that kind of vanishing felt almost impossible, which only deepened his suspicion that someone with real skill and resources had helped her disappear. He never stopped believing there was a reason behind her leaving that went deeper than a simple end to their bond. The pain in her voice that night, the way she had held back tears while trying to sound strong, the words she left him with, all of it told him this was not abandonment, it was sacrifice. He simply could not understand what she believed she was sacrificing herself to protect him from. Over the years, the council pressed him repeatedly to take a new mate, arguing that a pack as powerful as Blackthorne could not remain without a Luna forever, that stability required an heir, that grief, however genuine, could not be allowed to weaken the bloodline's future. Damien refused every proposal put in front of him, sometimes politely, sometimes with a flash of temper that reminded the council exactly why he had earned the title of Alpha King in the first place. He would not replace what he still believed, against all evidence and all reason, was simply waiting to be found again. His closest advisor and oldest friend, a broad-shouldered wolf named Callan Whitmore, was the only person who dared to speak honestly with him about it. "You cannot keep the pack frozen in the past forever," Callan told him one evening, as the two men stood on the balcony overlooking the training grounds. 5 years is a long time, Damien. Even bonds fade, given enough distance. "Not this one," Damien said quietly, his eyes fixed on the darkening horizon. "I would know if it had ended. I would feel it end. It has not ended, Callan. It has simply gone quiet." Callan did not argue further, though the doubt in his expression was clear enough. Loyalty kept him from pressing the matter, but even he privately wondered whether his friend's certainty was wisdom or simply grief wearing the mask of hope. What none of them knew, not even Damien himself, was that far south along the coast, disturbing reports had begun surfacing from smaller packs about Ashgrave scouts moving through unclaimed territories, quietly searching for something, or someone, they refused to name. When the reports reached Blackthorne territory, they arrived tangled in rumor and speculation, easy to dismiss as routine border tension between old rival packs. Damien, however, felt an inexplicable unease the moment he read them, a feeling that settled deep in his gut and refused to leave. He decided to investigate personally, against the advice of his counsel, who worried that an Alpha King traveling without a full guard was an unnecessary risk. Damien brushed aside their concerns. Something about the reports pulled at him in a way he could not fully explain, a persistent, nagging instinct that told him this was connected to Elena somehow, though he had no evidence to support the feeling beyond the ache in his chest that had never fully faded. He traveled south with only Callan and 2 trusted guards, following the trail of scattered reports through small towns and quiet territories, speaking with local pack leaders and human authorities alike, gathering pieces of a puzzle that seemed to be leading him steadily toward the coast. The trail eventually brought him to Millbrook, a quiet fishing town that seemed, on the surface, entirely unremarkable. There were no wolves registered in the area, no known pack activity, nothing that should have drawn Ashgrave scouts to such an unlikely location. And yet, the reports were specific enough that Damien felt compelled to walk the streets himself, trusting his senses more than any written account. He arrived on a gray afternoon, the smell of salt and rain hanging heavy in the air. The town moved at an easy, unhurried pace, fishermen unloading their boats, shopkeepers sweeping their doorsteps, children laughing somewhere in the distance. It was peaceful in a way that felt almost foreign to a man who had spent years steeped in pack politics and quiet tension. He walked through the town square without any clear plan, simply letting his senses stretch outward, the way he had trained himself to do since childhood, searching for anything unusual, any trace of wolf presence that did not belong in a town supposedly free of pack influence. And then, faint and fleeting, carried on a gust of wind rolling in from the harbor, he caught it. A scent so familiar it stopped him mid-step, his entire body going rigid, as 5 years of careful control threatened to shatter in an instant. It was faint, barely more than a whisper carried on the breeze, but there was no mistaking it, not to a wolf who had spent countless nights memorizing every detail of the woman he loved. Elena. His heart pounded as he turned in a slow circle, trying to pinpoint the direction the scent had come from, but the wind shifted, and the trail dissolved as quickly as it had appeared. For a moment, he wondered if his mind was simply playing a cruel trick on him, conjuring what he wanted most out of nothing but hope and exhaustion. But some instinct deep inside him, the same instinct that had never let him fully believe she was gone for good, told him otherwise. She was here. After 5 years of silence, after countless dead ends and sleepless nights, she was somewhere in this quiet coastal town, close enough that her scent had reached him on the wind. Damien stood frozen in the middle of the town square, the sounds of ordinary life continuing around him, utterly unaware that the world he had built his entire existence around was about to change forever. He did not yet know about Ren. He did not yet know how deeply the choices Elena made that night in the courtyard had shaped the years that followed. He only knew, with a certainty that settled into his bones like something ancient and undeniable, that after 5 long years, he had finally found her again. And this time, he had no intention of letting her disappear a second time, without an explanation. Elena felt it before she saw anything. She was standing behind the counter at Diane's clinic, sorting through a stack of paperwork, when a sudden, sharp awareness rippled through her chest, an old sensation she had not felt in 5 years but recognized instantly, the way a person never truly forgets the particular weight of a familiar hand. Her pen stilled against the paper, her breath caught. It could not be him. It was impossible. She had built her entire life around the certainty that this moment would never come, that the careful walls she constructed around herself and Ren would hold forever. She told herself it was nothing, a trick of nerves, or an old memory surfacing unexpectedly, and forced herself to keep working. But the feeling did not fade. If anything, it grew stronger as the afternoon wore on, a persistent hum at the edge of her senses that refused to be ignored, no matter how firmly she tried to push it away. By the time she picked Ren up from school that afternoon, her hands were trembling slightly on the steering wheel, and she caught herself glancing at every stranger on the street with a wariness she had not felt since her first months in Millbrook. Ren noticed immediately, the way she noticed most things that adults assumed passed her by. She studied her mother's face with those unusually perceptive amber eyes as they drove home, quiet for several minutes before finally speaking. "You feel funny today," Ren said simply, her small voice matter-of-fact in the way only children could manage. "Like when a storm is coming, but it's not raining yet." Elena forced a smile into place, glancing at her daughter in the rearview mirror. "I'm just tired, sweetheart. It's been a long day." Ren did not look entirely convinced, but she let the matter drop, turning her attention instead to the window as familiar streets rolled past. Elena appreciated, not for the first time, how remarkably intuitive and patient her daughter could be, qualities that felt like both a blessing and a quiet reminder of exactly who Ren's father was. That evening, after Ren had gone to bed, Elena sat by the window of their small cottage, staring out at the darkening street, unable to shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. She told herself repeatedly that it was nothing, that 5 years of careful hiding had not suddenly unraveled in a single afternoon, that Millbrook remained exactly the safe, quiet haven it had always been. But deep down, in the part of herself that had never fully stopped listening for him, she knew better. The following morning, she took Ren to school as usual, then drove to the small market near the town square to pick up groceries before her shift at the clinic began. The town moved around her in its familiar, unhurried rhythm, fishermen calling to each other near the docks, an elderly couple walking their dog along the harbor path. Nothing out of the ordinary to explain the tight, coiled tension that had settled into her shoulders since the day before. She was reaching for a basket of fresh vegetables outside the market when she felt it again, stronger this time, unmistakable, a presence so overwhelming it stole the breath from her lungs entirely. She turned, and across the crowded square, through the shifting flow of ordinary townspeople going about their morning routines, she saw him. Damien Blackthorne stood near the edge of the square, tall and unmistakable even after 5 years, dressed simply in a dark jacket that did nothing to disguise the commanding presence he carried in every line of his posture. His eyes swept the crowd with the focused intensity of a man searching for something specific, something he was determined not to miss. For one suspended, terrifying moment, their eyes nearly met. Elena's entire body went rigid with panic. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to disappear back into the crowd before he could recognize her, before 5 years of careful sacrifice unraveled in a single glance across a crowded market square. She dropped the basket of vegetables and turned sharply, weaving quickly between market stalls and startled shoppers, her heart hammering so violently she could hear it pounding in her own ears. She did not look back to see whether he had noticed her. She did not dare. She simply moved, fast and purposeful, cutting through a narrow side street and doubling back toward her car, every nerve in her body screaming that she needed to get to Ren immediately, that nothing else mattered until her daughter was safely beside her. She drove to the school with white-knuckled hands on the steering wheel, forcing herself to breathe slowly, despite the panic clawing at her chest. She told the school administrator that a family emergency required Ren's early dismissal, and within minutes, her daughter was buckled into the back seat, confused, but trusting her mother's urgency without question. "Mom, what's wrong?" Ren asked, studying Elena's pale face with growing concern. Elena forced herself to sound calm, though her voice shook slightly despite her best efforts. "Nothing's wrong, sweetheart. I just missed you today. We're going to spend the afternoon together." Ren, perceptive as always, did not fully believe the explanation, but she settled back into her seat, watching her mother's tense hands on the wheel with quiet, careful attention. Elena spent the rest of that day in a state of controlled panic, checking the locks on their cottage doors twice, keeping Ren close, jumping at every unexpected sound outside. She told herself repeatedly that Damien's presence in Millbrook might simply be coincidence, that he could not possibly have caught her scent in such a brief, crowded encounter, that her careful 5 years of hiding had not truly been undone by a single unlucky morning at the market. But even as she told herself this, some deeper, more honest part of her recognized the truth she had been avoiding for years. Damien Blackthorne did not travel to quiet coastal towns by accident, and a wolf bond as strong as theirs had once been did not simply fade into nothing, no matter how many miles or years stood between them. He had found her. The only question that remained, one that filled her with a fear sharper than anything she had felt in 5 long years, was how much longer she could keep the rest of the truth hidden from him, and what would happen to the careful, fragile life she had built the moment he finally learned the whole story. That night, long after Ren had fallen asleep, Elena sat awake by the window once more, watching the dark street outside with wide, unblinking eyes, waiting for a knock that did not come, dreading, and somehow also longing for the moment when Damien Blackthorne would finally find his way to her door. She did not have to wait long. 2 days after the market square, Damien finally traced Elena's trail to the small veterinary clinic on the edge of town. He had spent those 2 days walking every street in Millbrook, following faint threads of her scent that seemed to weave through the town like a puzzle designed specifically to frustrate him, doubling back and vanishing at odd corners, as though she had spent years deliberately learning how to erase her own presence. He arrived at the clinic just as Diane was closing up for the evening, the front lights dimmed, a closed sign hanging crooked in the window. Elena was inside alone, finishing paperwork at the front desk, unaware that the door was about to open behind her. The small bell above the entrance chimed, and Elena turned automatically, the polite refusal already forming on her lips about the clinic being closed for the day. The words died in her throat the moment she saw him standing in the doorway. For a long, breathless moment, neither of them spoke. Damien's golden eyes moved over her face, as though he were trying to memorize every detail he had missed over 5 long years, searching for changes, for answers, for some explanation that might make sense of everything that had happened between them. "Elena," he said finally, her name rough in his voice, carrying 5 years of unanswered questions in a single syllable. She set down her pen with hands that trembled slightly, despite her best effort to appear composed. "Damien, what are you doing here?" "You know why I'm here," he said, stepping further into the clinic, closing the door quietly behind him. "I felt you. I have been feeling you for 2 days, growing closer with every hour, and I am done pretending it is a coincidence that led me to this exact town." Elena's heart pounded painfully against her ribs. She had rehearsed this moment countless times in her mind over the years, imagined 100 different ways it might unfold, yet now that it was actually happening, every carefully prepared explanation abandoned her entirely. "You need to leave," she said instead, her voice quieter than she intended. "This isn't safe for you, or for me." Something flashed across his expression, a mixture of hurt and disbelief that made her chest ache with old, familiar guilt. "Not safe? Elena, I have spent 5 years searching for you. 5 years, wondering every single day whether you were alive, whether something terrible had happened, whether I would ever get the chance to understand why the woman I loved vanished without a single word of explanation, beyond a whisper I have replayed in my mind every night since." "I told you why," she said, her voice cracking slightly despite her best efforts to remain steady. "I told you I still loved you. That was the truth. It has always been the truth." "Then explain the rest of it," Damien said, closing the distance between them until he stood just a few feet away, close enough that she could feel the familiar warmth radiating from him, close enough that the old pull of their bond ached sharply in her chest. "Explain why loving me meant leaving in the middle of the night without a word. Explain what threat was serious enough that you believed disappearing was safer than trusting me to protect you." Elena's resolve, built carefully over 5 years of careful silence, began to crack under the weight of his presence, under the raw honesty in his voice, under the sheer exhaustion of carrying a secret alone for so long. "If I tell you," she said slowly, forcing the words out despite every instinct screaming at her to stay silent, "you cannot react the way I know you want to react. You cannot storm back to your territory and declare war on people who might still be watching, still waiting for exactly that kind of response." Damien's jaw tightened, but he nodded once, sharp and controlled. "Tell me." Elena took a deep, unsteady breath, years of careful secrecy finally beginning to unravel in the quiet, dim light of the closing clinic. "The night before I left," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "an emissary from the Ashgrave pack found me alone, near the eastern stream. She told me they knew I was pregnant, even before I had told you, even before I had fully confirmed it myself. She said they intended to use the child as leverage, forcing you into an alliance marriage with their heir, threatening to end the pregnancy before it ever came to term if I refused to disappear quietly. The silence that followed was absolute. Damien's entire body had gone rigid, his golden eyes wide, with a mixture of shock and dawning horror that Elena recognized immediately, the same reaction she had spent 5 years trying to protect him from experiencing in real time, in the middle of an active threat, unable to think clearly enough to protect either her or their unborn child. "A child," he said finally, his voice barely audible. "You were pregnant, with my child." Elena nodded, tears finally spilling over, despite her best efforts to remain composed. "I couldn't tell you. I couldn't risk you trying to fight them directly, couldn't risk the political chaos that would follow if the threat became public knowledge before I found a way to disappear safely. I made the decision alone, in less than a day, and I have lived with the weight of that decision every single day since." Damien's hands curled into fists at his sides, years of controlled leadership straining visibly against a surge of protective fury he could barely contain. "You should have told me. I would have found a way to protect you both." "I would have—" "You would have tried," Elena interrupted gently. "And in trying, you might have made everything worse. The Ashgrave Pact does not make idle threats, Damien. You know that as well as I do. I could not risk our child's life on the hope that you could outmaneuver them fast enough to matter." Damien's expression shifted through a storm of emotions, anger and grief, and something that looked almost like awe at the sacrifice she had carried entirely alone for 5 long years. "Where is the child now?" he asked finally, his voice rough with barely controlled emotion. "Elena, where is our son or daughter?" Elena wiped at her eyes, steadying herself for the final piece of truth she had been protecting for 5 years, the truth that would change everything between them the moment it was spoken aloud. "She's at home," Elena said quietly. "Her name is Wren. She's 4 years old. And Damien, she is exactly as strong as you always hoped our child might be." The look that crossed Damien's face in that moment, raw and overwhelming, and entirely undone, would stay with Elena for the rest of her life. 5 years of grief and searching collapsed into a single instant of impossible joy, tangled hopelessly with the horror of everything he had missed. "I have a daughter," he whispered, as though testing the words for the first time, as though needing to say them aloud to believe they were finally real. Elena nodded, her own tears falling freely now. "You have a daughter, and I am so sorry it took 5 years for you to know it." Neither of them moved for a long moment, the weight of 5 lost years hanging heavy in the quiet clinic between them, the truth finally spoken aloud after so long buried beneath careful silence and desperate sacrifice. Somewhere across town, in the small cottage where she had spent her entire life so far, Wren stirred in her sleep, restless and uneasy, as though some instinct deep inside her already sensed that everything was about to change. Elena drove Damien to the cottage in near silence, both of them too overwhelmed for further conversation, the weight of everything spoken in the clinic still settling heavily between them. Damien sat rigid in the passenger seat, his hands clasped tightly together, his eyes fixed on the passing streets as though trying to memorize every detail of the town that had hidden his daughter from him for 4 years. When they arrived, Elena asked him to wait outside for a moment while she checked on Wren, needing a few seconds to gather herself before introducing her daughter to a father Wren had never known existed. She found Wren already awake, sitting up in bed with her amber eyes wide and alert in the darkness. "Someone is here," Wren said before Elena could speak, her small voice carrying an odd certainty. "Someone important." Elena sat down on the edge of the bed, smoothing a hand over her daughter's dark hair, searching for the right words to explain something she had spent years preparing for, and somehow still felt entirely unprepared to say. "Wren, sweetheart, there is someone here who has been looking for us for a very long time. His name is Damien, and he is your father." Wren's eyes widened further, curiosity replacing the initial uncertainty on her small face. "My father? You said he lived far away and couldn't visit." "That was true, for a long time," Elena said gently. "But he found us, and he wants very much to meet you, if you would like to meet him too." Wren considered this with the same careful, thoughtful expression she brought to everything, then nodded slowly. "Okay, I want to meet him." They found Damien standing in the small living room, having let himself in through the unlocked door, his tall frame looking almost too large for the modest space. When Wren appeared in the doorway beside her mother, small and solemn and undeniably his, Damien's composure broke entirely. He knelt down slowly, bringing himself to her eye level, his golden eyes searching her face with an expression of wonder that made Elena's chest ache. "Hello, Wren," he said softly. "I am very glad to finally meet you." Wren studied him with the same unhurried, perceptive attention she gave everything, tilting her head slightly, as though listening to something beyond his words. "You feel like Mom," she said finally. "Like family." Damien's breath caught audibly. "I am your family," he said, his voice rough with emotion he made no effort to hide. "I have wanted to meet you for your entire life, even though I did not know you existed until tonight." Over the following hour, in the small, warm living room of the cottage, Elena watched a careful, tentative bond begin forming between father and daughter, Wren asking blunt, curious questions, with the fearless honesty only children possessed, Damien answering each one patiently, clearly savoring every small detail he learned about the daughter he had missed, knowing for 4 years. It was during this quiet, fragile moment of new beginnings that Damien's phone buzzed sharply in his pocket, the sound cutting through the gentle atmosphere like a blade. He answered it with visible reluctance, his expression shifting rapidly from warmth to sharp, focused alertness, as he listened to whoever spoke on the other end. "When?" he asked, his voice suddenly hard and commanding, all traces of the gentle father from moments before, replaced by the alpha king Elena remembered from years past. "How many were spotted, and how close to the town?" Elena's stomach dropped as she watched his expression darken further. When he finally ended the call, he turned to her, with an urgency that made her blood run cold. "Ashgrave scouts," he said grimly. 3 of them, spotted less than 2 miles outside of town less than an hour ago. Callan believes they may have picked up my trail while I was searching for you, and if they followed me here, Elena, they may already suspect exactly what I have just discovered tonight." Elena's arms instinctively wrapped around Wren, pulling her daughter close, years of careful protection suddenly feeling dangerously fragile in the face of a threat she had spent 5 years successfully avoiding. "They can't know about her," Elena said, panic sharpening her voice. "Damien, if they find out she exists, if they realize how strong she already is." "I know," Damien said, his jaw tight with barely restrained fury. "Which is exactly why we are not staying here another night, to find out how much they already suspect." Wren, sensing the sudden shift in tension despite not fully understanding the danger being discussed, pressed closer against her mother, her small hand finding Elena's with the instinctive need for comfort that even a remarkably perceptive 4-year-old could not fully suppress. "Mom," she said quietly, "is something bad happening?" Elena forced herself to remain calm for her daughter's sake, even as fear coiled tightly in her chest. "Everything is going to be all right, sweetheart. Your father is here now, and he is going to help us make sure we stay safe." Damien knelt down again, meeting Wren's uncertain gaze with a steady, reassuring expression, despite the storm clearly raging behind his eyes. "I promise you, Wren, nothing and no one is going to hurt you while I am here. That is a promise I intend to keep for the rest of your life." Wren studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly, some deep, instinctive trust settling into her small shoulders, despite the fear still visible in her wide amber eyes. Within the hour, the 3 of them had gathered only the most essential belongings from the cottage, Elena's hands shaking as she packed years of careful, quiet life into a single hastily filled bag. Damien called for reinforcements from his own guard, positioning trusted wolves to secure the perimeter of the town, while they made preparations to move somewhere safer. As they finally stepped out into the cool night air, Wren held tightly between them. Elena could not shake the unsettling feeling that the quiet, protected life she had built for 5 careful years was ending tonight, replaced by a danger she had once hoped to escape permanently. Somewhere beyond the edge of town, hidden among the dark trees, unseen eyes watched the small cottage with cold, patient interest, already relaying word back to distant Ashgrave leadership that the missing Blackthorn heir had finally been found. The 5 years of careful hiding were over. What came next would test everything Elena, Damien, and their small, remarkable daughter were capable of surviving together. They drove through the night toward a safe house Damien's guard had secured on the outskirts of a neighboring town, a modest property surrounded by dense forest that offered natural cover and multiple escape routes if trouble found them again. Callan Whitmore was waiting when they arrived, his broad frame tense with alertness, his eyes widening slightly with surprise when he caught sight of Wren asleep against Elena's shoulder in the back seat. "She looks just like you," Callan said quietly to Damien, as they carried their few belongings inside, careful not to wake the exhausted child. Same eyes, same stubborn set to her jaw already. Damien allowed himself a brief, tired smile, the first genuine moment of lightness since the phone call that had interrupted their evening. "She is remarkable, Callan. In the space of a single evening, I have learned I have a daughter, and that she may already be stronger than most fully grown wolves I have trained." Callan's expression sobered quickly, which is exactly why the Ashgrave pack wants her found. A wolf with that kind of inherited strength, awakening this early, this strongly, represents exactly the threat they always feared from a union between you and Elena. If they confirm what we already suspect, they will not simply threaten from a distance any longer. They will move directly to eliminate the danger before it grows any further. Elena, settling Wren into a small bedroom down the hall, returned to the main room in time to hear the end of this exchange, her face paling further at the blunt assessment of the danger her daughter now faced. "We need a real plan," she said firmly, "not just running from one hiding place to another. 5 years of hiding bought us time, but clearly, it was never going to be a permanent solution." Damien nodded, some of his exhaustion giving way to the focused, commanding presence Elena remembered from years of watching him lead his pack through difficult decisions. "Agreed. Which means we do not hide any longer. We return to Blackthorn territory, where our defenses are strongest, and we prepare properly for whatever the Ashgrave pack intends to attempt." Returning brings her directly into their political focus, Elena pointed out, worry sharp in her voice. "The moment she is seen within Blackthorn territory, every rival pack in the region will know exactly who she is and what she represents. They will also know," Damien countered evenly, "that she is protected by the full strength of the Blackthorn pack, rather than hidden alone with a single mother in an undefended human town. Elena, I understand the instinct to keep running, to keep hiding her from every possible threat, but 5 years of hiding did not make her safe. It only delayed the moment danger finally caught up to you both. I do not intend to let that mistake continue." Elena wanted to argue further, old instincts of protective secrecy still pulling hard against the idea of stepping fully back into a world of pack politics and territorial danger. But some quieter, more honest part of her recognized the truth in what Damien was saying. She had spent 5 years running, and despite every careful precaution, danger had found them anyway. Perhaps real safety had never been about hiding at all, but about standing strong enough, surrounded by enough strength and support, that danger could not easily reach them regardless. "All right," she said finally, exhaustion and reluctant trust mixing in her voice. "We go to Blackthorn territory, but Damien, I need you to understand something clearly. Wherever this leads, whatever happens next, my priority remains Wren's safety above everything else, including old wounds between us that still need addressing." "Understood," Damien said quietly, something gentle passing briefly across his expression despite the tension of the moment. "And for what it is worth, Elena, I am deeply sorry for every year you carried this burden alone. Whatever grief or anger remains between us, it does not compare to the guilt I feel knowing you faced something this dangerous, without me beside you." Elena studied him for a long moment, old hurt and lingering love tangled together in a way that left her unable to fully separate one feeling from the other. "We can talk about that later," she said finally. "Right now, we focus on keeping her safe." Damien nodded, accepting the deflection without pushing further, understanding instinctively that some conversations required more time and healing than a single tense night could offer. They departed for Blackthorn territory before dawn, traveling in a heavily guarded convoy that Damien's people had arranged with remarkable speed, a testament to the loyalty and discipline of the pack he had built over years of steady leadership. Wren, woken gently, and told only that they were going on an important trip to meet more of her father's family, handled the sudden upheaval with the same quiet resilience she brought to everything else, watching the passing scenery with wide, curious eyes rather than fear. The journey took most of the day, winding through increasingly remote roads until the familiar boundaries of Blackthorn territory finally came into view, forested hills rising in the distance, the old stone marker Elena remembered vividly from the night she left standing exactly where it always had. Crossing back over that boundary line felt surreal, a strange collision of past and present that left Elena's chest tight with complicated emotion. She had left this place in desperate secrecy 5 years earlier, certain she would never return. Now she crossed back openly, her daughter beside her, the very child she had once fled to protect, now walking directly into the heart of the territory that had originally made her a target. Word of their arrival spread quickly through the pack, curious and cautious faces watching from windows and doorways as the convoy made its way toward the main pack house. Elena felt the weight of countless stares, some curious, some suspicious, all clearly aware that something significant was unfolding after 5 years of unexplained absence. Ren, sensing her mother's tension, slipped a small hand into Elena's, her amber eyes taking in the impressive scale of the pack house with quiet astonishment. "Is this where you used to live, Mom?" "It is," Elena said softly, squeezing her daughter's hand gently. "And now, if we are careful and brave, it might become home again." As they stepped through the grand entrance of the Blackthorn pack house, Damien's guard falling into protective formation around them, Elena allowed herself a small, cautious flicker of hope amid the fear and uncertainty that had defined the past several days. They were home. Whether that home would remain safe for long enough to matter remained, for now, an open and dangerous question. Settling into the pack house came with its own difficulties, separate entirely from the looming threat of the Ashgrave pack. Elena found herself navigating a strange, uncomfortable blend of familiarity and estrangement, walking through halls she once knew intimately, while feeling like a stranger, returning to a life that had moved on without her, in countless small ways. The Pack Council, informed quickly of Ren's existence and her remarkable early strength, reacted with a complicated mixture of celebration and concern. Many welcomed the news with genuine joy, thrilled at the prospect of a powerful heir, securing the Blackthorn bloodline for another generation. Others, more cautious by nature, worried openly about the danger her existence now represented, the very real possibility that Ashgrave aggression might escalate quickly, now that their worst fears about the child's power had been confirmed. Damien handled these concerns with practiced diplomacy, though Elena could see the toll it took on him, balancing the joy of finally knowing his daughter against the constant pressure of protecting both her and the wider pack from potential retaliation. He increased security measures throughout the territory significantly, doubling patrols along every border, tightening protocols around the pack house itself, ensuring that Ren was never left without at least 2 trusted guards nearby at all times. Ren adapted to her new surroundings with the same quiet resilience she had shown throughout her short life, though the sudden scale of everything clearly overwhelmed her at times. She approached the pack house's many wolves with cautious curiosity, quickly warming to a few gentle, patient guards who took the time to answer her endless questions, while remaining shy and reserved around the more intimidating members of Damien's inner council. Elena watched her daughter navigate this new world with a complicated tangle of pride and worry, grateful that Ren possessed the emotional steadiness to handle such an enormous change, while simultaneously grieving the quiet, simple childhood in Millbrook that had been permanently taken from her. Between them, Elena and Damien settled into an uneasy but functional rhythm, working together closely for Ren's sake, while carefully avoiding the deeper, unresolved emotions that still lingered heavily beneath the surface of every interaction. They discussed security logistics, coordinated schedules, presented a united front for Ren and the wider pack, all while studiously avoiding any real conversation about the 5 lost years between them, or what, if anything, remained of the bond they once shared. It was Ren, in her characteristically blunt and perceptive way, who finally forced the issue into the open. They were sharing a quiet dinner together one evening, nearly 2 weeks after arriving at the pack house, when Ren set down her fork and studied her parents with unusually serious eyes. "You still love each other," she said simply, Not as a question, but as a calm, confident observation. I can feel it. Why don't you just say so? Elena nearly choked on her water, while Damien's fork paused halfway to his mouth, both parents caught entirely off guard by their daughter's directness. Ren, Elena said carefully, it's a bit more complicated than that, sweetheart. Why? Ren pressed, with the relentless logic only a child could deploy so effectively. You love him, he loves you. I can feel both things very clearly, like two warm colors that match. Why does anything else matter more than that? Damien set down his own fork, exchanging a brief, startled glance with Elena before answering carefully. Sometimes, Ren, love is not the only thing that determines what happens between two people. There is trust that needs rebuilding, and time needed to heal old hurts, even when love itself was never truly the problem. Ren considered this explanation with obvious skepticism, clearly unconvinced by the adult complexity being offered to her. That sounds like you're both being stubborn, she said finally, returning her attention to her dinner with the satisfied air of someone who had delivered an unquestionably accurate assessment. Despite the tension of the moment, Elena found herself fighting back an unexpected laugh, catching Damien's eye across the table and finding matching amusement flickering there despite everything else weighing on both of them. She's not entirely wrong, Damien said quietly, once Ren had become fully absorbed again in her meal. No, Elena admitted, some of her careful guardedness softening slightly. She's not. Later that evening, after Ren had been settled into bed under the watchful eye of a trusted guard, Elena found herself walking through the quiet gardens behind the pack house, the same gardens where she and Damien had shared countless conversations during their years together before everything fell apart. She was not entirely surprised when Damien found her there, his footsteps familiar and unhurried on the gravel path behind her. She has a point, you know, he said quietly, coming to stand beside her near the old stone fountain at the garden's center. Our daughter, I mean, about stubbornness. Elena allowed herself a small, tired smile. She usually does. It's a little unsettling, honestly, how perceptive she is. She gets that from you, Damien said softly. You always saw straight through pretense, straight to whatever truth people were trying to avoid. Elena turned to look at him fully, the moonlight casting soft shadows across familiar features that had aged only slightly in 5 years, still achingly familiar, despite everything that separated them now. Damien, I meant what I told you that night in the courtyard. I never stopped loving you. Leaving was the hardest thing I have ever done, and not a single day passed where I didn't think about you, wonder about you, ache for the life we should have had together. Then why does it still feel like there's distance between us? Damien asked quietly, taking a careful step closer. Even now, safely back here, together, why does it feel like you're still holding something back? Elena hesitated, old fear warring with a desperate need for honesty after so many years of careful silence. Because I'm afraid, she admitted finally. Afraid that trusting fully again, opening myself completely to you and to this life, only leaves us both more vulnerable to losing everything a second time. I protected myself by staying guarded. Damien, I'm not entirely sure how to stop doing that, even now that the immediate reason for hiding is gone. Damien reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to step away if she wished, and gently took her hand in his. Then let's learn together, he said quietly, slowly, carefully, however long it takes. I am not asking you to forget the pain of the past 5 years, Elena. I am only asking for the chance to help you heal from it, the way I should have been able to from the very beginning. Elena looked down at their joined hands, 5 years of careful distance suddenly feeling smaller, more surmountable, than it had in longer than she could remember. I'd like that, she said softly. I'd like that very much. For the first time since returning to Blackthorn territory, standing together in the quiet moonlit garden, something that felt distinctly like hope began settling gently into the fragile space between them, even as the looming threat of the Ashgrave pack continued gathering, unseen, somewhere beyond the safety of the territory's borders. The attack came on a bright, deceptively calm afternoon, nearly 3 weeks after Elena, Damien, and Ren had settled into life at the pack house. Ren had been playing in the enclosed training yard behind the main building, watched closely by 2 guards, while Elena attended a meeting with Diane, who had traveled from Millbrook to help Elena settle a few remaining matters from her old life. The first sign of trouble came as a sudden, sharp silence, the birds that usually filled the surrounding trees falling quiet all at once, in a way that immediately set every experienced wolf in the vicinity on high alert. One of Wren's guards, a steady young wolf named Corwin, felt the shift in the air first, his senses flaring with sudden, urgent warning. "Get her inside," he said sharply to his fellow guard, already positioning himself protectively between Wren and the tree line at the yard's edge. Now. But the Ashgrave scouts had planned their approach carefully, striking from multiple directions simultaneously to overwhelm the limited guard presence before backup could arrive. 3 figures emerged from the trees in rapid succession, moving with the coordinated precision of wolves who had trained extensively for exactly this kind of targeted strike. Wren, despite her young age, reacted with startling instinct the moment danger became apparent, years of Elena's careful training kicking in immediately. She pressed herself low against the ground, exactly as her mother had taught her, making herself a smaller, harder target, while Corwin and his fellow guard moved to intercept the approaching threats. The confrontation was brief but fierce, Corwin managing to fend off the first attacker while shouting urgently for reinforcements, the alarm quickly spreading through the pack house as more guards rushed toward the training yard. Elena heard the commotion from inside and felt her blood turn to ice, every protective instinct screaming at her to reach her daughter immediately. She burst from the meeting room and sprinted through the halls, Damien appearing beside her within seconds, having felt the surge of danger through the pack bond that connected him to every wolf under his protection. Together they raced toward the training yard, arriving just as the situation reached its most dangerous point. One of the Ashgrave scouts had broken through the guard's defense, moving with terrifying speed directly toward where Wren crouched near the yard's far wall. Elena's heart stopped entirely as she watched the scene unfold, seemingly in slow motion, every instinct in her body screaming that she would not reach her daughter in time. But Wren, small and remarkable, and stronger than anyone fully understood, did not simply wait to be caught. As the scout closed the final distance between them, something shifted visibly in the air around Wren, an unmistakable surge of raw, untrained power radiating outward from her small frame. The approaching wolf stumbled suddenly, as though hitting an invisible wall, disoriented long enough for Corwin to close the gap and tackle him fully to the ground. Damien reached the yard seconds later, his own considerable strength on full display as he moved to subdue the remaining threats with the ruthless efficiency of a wolf who had spent years perfecting exactly these skills. Elena reached Wren almost simultaneously, scooping her daughter into her arms with trembling hands, checking frantically for any sign of injury, despite the child's evident, if shaken, wellness. "I'm okay, Mom," Wren said quietly, though her small voice shook slightly with the aftermath of adrenaline and fear. "I did what you taught me. I made myself small, and then something just happened, like a push, and he fell down." Elena held her daughter tightly, relief and terror warring violently in her chest as she processed how close they had come to catastrophe. Around them, Damien's guards worked quickly to secure the 2 remaining attackers, while Corwin's captive was pulled roughly to his feet, defiant despite his failed mission. Damien approached the captured scout with barely controlled fury, radiating from every line of his powerful frame. "Who sent you?" he demanded, his voice carrying the full weight of alpha authority. "And do not waste my time pretending otherwise. We both know exactly which pack you serve." The scout, young and clearly frightened despite his attempted show of defiance, remained silent for a long moment before finally speaking. "The Ashgrave elders learned of the child's arrival here weeks ago. They sent us to confirm her strength and, if possible, eliminate the threat before it could mature further. We were not meant to be caught." "And yet you were," Damien said coldly, "which means your elders will know soon enough that their attempt has failed. Tell me, does that change their plans, or simply accelerate them?" The scout's silence answered the question clearly enough. Damien turned away in disgust, motioning for his guards to secure the prisoners properly, while he crossed quickly to where Elena still held Wren tightly against her chest. "Are you both all right?" he asked urgently, relief evident beneath the residual tension still tight in his voice. Elena nodded shakily, though her eyes remained wide with the lingering fear of how close disaster had come. "She's fine. She's remarkable, actually." She defended herself, Damien. Somehow, instinctively, without any real training, she pushed him back. Damien's expression shifted to something like awed pride even amid the tension of the moment, reaching out gently to smooth a hand over Ren's dark hair. "You did wonderfully, little one. I am so proud of how brave and clever you were." Ren managed a small, shaky smile despite everything, some of her earlier fear easing slightly under her father's obvious pride and her mother's tight, protective embrace. But the relief of the moment could not fully mask the grim reality now facing all of them. The Ashgrave pack had confirmed exactly what they feared most, that Ren possessed real, dangerous power that made her an even more significant threat in their eyes, rather than reassuring them into standing down. "This will not be their last attempt," Damien said quietly to Elena later that evening, once Ren had finally settled into an exhausted, guarded sleep, and the captured scouts had been secured for questioning. "If anything, today's failure will only push them toward a larger, more decisive strike." Elena wrapped her arms around herself, old fear resurfacing alongside a new, fierce determination that had been steadily building since the moment she watched her daughter defend herself in the training yard. "Then we prepare properly," she said firmly. "No more waiting for them to make the next move. We anticipate it, and we make certain that whatever they attempt next, they find us fully ready." Damien studied her for a long moment, something like renewed respect flickering behind his golden eyes. "Together then," he said quietly. "However this ends, we face it together, exactly as it should have been from the very beginning." Elena nodded, reaching for his hand without hesitation this time, the last remnants of old distance finally giving way, entirely beneath the shared urgency of protecting their daughter from the danger still gathering steadily on the horizon. The days following the failed attack passed in a blur of intense preparation. Damien summoned his full council, laying out the confirmed threat from the Ashgrave pack with the direct, focused clarity his people had come to rely on during moments of crisis. Security around the pack house tripled almost overnight, patrols extending further into the surrounding territory, watch schedules adjusted to eliminate any possible gaps an enemy might exploit. Elena, rather than retreating into fear, found herself drawn instead into active preparation, insisting on being included in strategy discussions despite some initial hesitation from a few of the more traditional council members. Her years away from pack politics had not dulled her sharp instincts, and her first-hand knowledge of exactly how the Ashgrave pack operated, gained painfully through years of careful vigilance while raising Ren alone, proved unexpectedly valuable to the planning process. "They will not attempt another small, quiet strike," Elena said during one particularly tense council meeting, standing confidently despite the weight of several skeptical gazes around the table. "Their scouts failed, and worse, were captured, giving us direct confirmation of their intentions. Their pride alone will push them toward something larger, more decisive, something meant to demonstrate strength rather than risk further embarrassment." Callan, seated near Damien's right hand, nodded slowly in agreement. "She's right. The Ashgrave elders value strength and reputation above nearly everything else. A failed covert operation against a rival pack, especially one involving a child, represents a significant loss of face for them. They will feel pressured to respond with something unmistakably powerful." "Which means," Damien added grimly, "we should expect a direct confrontation rather than further covert attempts. Likely soon, before they lose any additional advantage from the element of surprise they still believe they possess." The council spent the following days finalizing extensive defensive preparations, reinforcing key points throughout the territory, coordinating with a handful of allied packs willing to offer support given the severity of the confirmed threat, and establishing careful contingency plans specifically focused on Ren's protection should the situation deteriorate rapidly. Ren herself, remarkably resilient despite the frightening attack she had survived, began working with a trusted trainer under careful supervision, slowly learning to understand and control the considerable power that had already begun awakening within her. Elena watched these sessions with a complicated mixture of pride and lingering worry, grateful for the guidance while still wishing, somewhere deep down, that her daughter could have been allowed a more ordinary, gentle childhood. "She learns remarkably quickly," the trainer, An older wolf named Fenwick reported to Damien and Elena after one such session, far faster than I would expect, even accounting for her evident natural strength. Within a few months of consistent training, she may develop control most adult wolves take years to achieve. Is that good news or concerning news? Elena asked, only half joking, watching Ren practice careful breathing exercises nearby under Fenwick's earlier instruction. Perhaps a bit of both, Fenwick admitted with a small, understanding smile. But given the current circumstances, I suspect you will be grateful for every bit of additional strength and control she develops, however quickly it comes. Elena could not fully disagree, though the reminder of exactly why such rapid development had become necessary settled uncomfortably in her chest. The confrontation both Elena and the council had anticipated arrived precisely 8 days after the failed scout mission, though it came in a form none of them had fully expected. Rather than a direct military strike against Blackthorn territory itself, the Ashgrave Pack issued a formal challenge through proper diplomatic channels, invoking an old, rarely used tradition that allowed rival packs to settle significant disputes through a sanctioned confrontation, rather than open, uncontrolled warfare. The challenge specifically named Damien as the primary combatant, with the stated condition that victory would grant the Ashgrave Pack legal claim over Ren, to be raised and trained according to their own methods, and ultimately married into their bloodline once she came of age, effectively neutralizing the threat they perceived by absorbing her power directly into their own pack structure instead. They believe they can defeat you directly, Callan said grimly, once the formal challenge had been reviewed by the full council, which suggests significant confidence in their own preparation, or perhaps simple desperation, given how badly their covert approach failed. Damien's expression remained carefully controlled, though the tension in his shoulders betrayed the seriousness with which he received the challenge. Regardless of their motivation, the tradition itself is binding under regional pack law. Refusing the challenge entirely would mean automatic forfeiture, which the Ashgrave elders would undoubtedly interpret and enforce exactly as though I had lost the confrontation directly. Elena felt cold dread settle deep in her stomach. Then you have to fight, she said quietly, though it was less a question than a grim acknowledgement of the reality now facing them. I have to fight, Damien confirmed, meeting her eyes steadily despite the danger clearly weighing on him. And I have to win, decisively enough that no further challenges will follow. The days leading up to the sanctioned confrontation passed with agonizing tension, Damien training intensively alongside his most trusted guards, pushing his considerable strength and skill to their absolute limits, in preparation for a fight that would determine not only his own fate, but the entire future of the family he had only just begun rebuilding. Elena watched these preparations with fierce, quiet determination, refusing to allow herself the luxury of despair, despite the very real danger looming ahead. She spent the nights before the confrontation close beside Damien, old walls between them finally falling away entirely under the shared weight of what they now faced together. Whatever happens, Damien told her quietly, the night before the scheduled confrontation, I need you to know that finding you again, learning about Ren, these past weeks together, despite everything else happening around us, have been the best of my entire life. No outcome tomorrow changes that truth. Elena pressed close against him, refusing to entertain the possibility of losing him again so soon after finally finding their way back to each other. You are not losing tomorrow, she said fiercely. I refuse to accept any other outcome, and neither should you. Damien pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, some of the tension in his powerful frame easing slightly under her fierce, unwavering confidence. Then I will fight tomorrow with that certainty, carrying me forward, he said softly. For you, and for Ren, and for the future we still intend to build together. The following morning arrived with a heavy, tense quiet settling over the entire territory, every wolf in Blackthorn Pack understanding fully the significance of what was about to unfold. Elena stood beside Ren near the edge of the designated confrontation grounds, her daughter's small hand gripped tightly in hers, both of them watching, as Damien prepared to face whatever champion the Ashgrave Pack had sent to challenge him. The confrontation grounds sat in a wide, cleared valley on neutral territory between the Blackthorn and Ashgrave lands, a location traditionally used for exactly this kind of sanctioned dispute for generations. Wolves from both packs gathered along the surrounding hillsides, along with a handful of neutral observers from allied territories, all present to witness and formally validate whatever outcome the confrontation produced. The Ashgrave pack arrived in a slow, deliberate procession, their elders positioned prominently at the front, followed by their chosen champion, a massive, scarred wolf named Garrick, who had built a fearsome reputation across the northern territories through decades of ruthless, effective combat. Elena felt a fresh wave of fear settle in her chest at the sight of him, the sheer size and evident brutal experience radiating from every line of his powerful frame. "He's fought in over 30 sanctioned confrontations," Callan said quietly beside her, his own expression tight with concern, despite his effort to maintain a reassuring composure for Elena's sake. "Won every single one, several by lethal outcome rather than simple submission." Elena's grip on Ren's hand tightened involuntarily. "Damien has to win," she said, more to herself than to Callan, a desperate mantra against the fear rising steadily in her chest. "He will," Callan said firmly, though Elena caught the flicker of genuine worry beneath his confident tone. "He has more at stake than pride or territory today. He has everything to fight for, Elena. And that kind of motivation carries weight even against an opponent as fearsome as Garrick." The formal proceedings began with traditional declarations from representatives of both packs, establishing clearly the terms and stakes of the confrontation according to ancient regional law. Damien stepped forward when called, his expression carefully controlled despite the obvious tension radiating from his powerful frame, meeting Garrick's confident, predatory gaze without any visible hesitation. Ren watched her father with wide, frightened eyes, her small hand trembling slightly within Elena's grip. "Mom," she whispered, "is he going to be okay?" Elena knelt down quickly, meeting her daughter's frightened gaze with as much steady confidence as she could manage, despite her own racing heart. "Your father is one of the strongest wolves in the entire Northern Territories, Ren. He has trained his entire life for moments exactly like this one. I need you to trust him, exactly the way I do." Ren nodded slowly, though her small frame remained tense with obvious fear as the two combatants took their positions at the center of the cleared valley. The confrontation began the moment the presiding elder gave the traditional signal, both wolves shifting instantly into their full wolf forms, massive and powerful, circling each other with the careful, calculated caution of experienced fighters, assessing exactly where their opponent's weaknesses might lie. Garrick struck first, a powerful, testing lunge meant to gauge Damien's reflexes and defensive capability. Damien dodged with practiced efficiency, countering quickly with a strike of his own that Garrick deflected just as smoothly. The two wolves traded a rapid series of testing exchanges, each probing carefully for any opening, the crowd along the surrounding hillsides watching in tense, near-silent anticipation. Elena watched with her heart in her throat, every instinct screaming with fear, despite her earlier confident words to Ren. She had seen Damien fight before, years ago, and knew intimately the considerable skill and strength he possessed. But Garrick's reputation was not exaggerated, his movements carrying the brutal efficiency of decades spent perfecting exactly this kind of lethal combat. The confrontation intensified steadily as the minutes wore on, both combatants beginning to show the early signs of real exertion, exchanging increasingly powerful strikes as the careful early testing gave way to genuine, committed combat. Garrick landed a solid hit against Damien's shoulder, drawing a sharp intake of breath from the watching crowd, though Damien recovered quickly, countering with a strike of his own that clearly staggered his massive opponent. "He's holding his own," Callan murmured, tension evident in every line of his powerful frame as he watched the confrontation unfold. Better than holding his own, actually. Garrick is not accustomed to opponents who match his intensity this closely. The confrontation reached its critical turning point roughly 20 minutes into the fight, both wolves showing clear signs of exhaustion, blood visible on both combatants from a series of increasingly desperate exchanges. Garrick, growing visibly frustrated at his inability to secure a decisive advantage against an opponent he had clearly expected to overwhelm more easily, began fighting with increasing recklessness, sacrificing careful defense for raw, aggressive power. Damien, recognizing the shift in his opponent's approach, adjusted his own strategy accordingly, deliberately drawing Garrick into a series of increasingly aggressive strikes, while carefully conserving his own remaining strength, waiting patiently for the precise moment his opponent's growing recklessness would finally create the opening he needed. That opening arrived in a single, decisive moment. Garak, overcommitting to a powerful lunge meant to end the confrontation quickly, left himself momentarily exposed in a way his exhaustion and frustration had blinded him to recognizing. Damien moved with sudden, explosive speed, sidestepping the lunge and countering with a strike, carrying the full weight of his remaining strength. Garak went down hard, the massive wolf's considerable strength finally overwhelmed by the precise, decisive strike. Damien stood over his fallen opponent, breathing heavily but clearly victorious, waiting the traditionally required moment to allow Garak the opportunity to formally submit, rather than risk further, potentially lethal escalation. Garak, after a long, tense pause, finally offered the traditional gesture of submission, ending the confrontation decisively in Damien's favor. A wave of relief swept visibly through the gathered Blackthorn wolves, while the Ashgrave observers stood in stunned, uncomfortable silence at their champion's unexpected defeat. Elena felt her knees nearly buckle with overwhelming relief, tears springing unbidden to her eyes as she watched Damien shift carefully back into his human form, exhausted and injured, but undeniably, gloriously victorious. Ren let out a sound somewhere between a sob and a cheer, breaking free from Elena's grip to run toward her father the moment the formal proceedings allowed it. Damien caught his daughter in a tired but fiercely protective embrace, his eyes finding Elena's over Ren's small shoulder, exhaustion and relief and love, all clearly visible in his expression, despite the physical toll the confrontation had clearly taken. The presiding elders quickly finalized the formal outcome, declaring the Ashgrave challenge decisively resolved in Damien's favor, their claim over Ren permanently and legally nullified under the binding terms of the ancient tradition both packs had agreed to honor. The Ashgrave elders, though clearly displeased, had no legitimate recourse remaining, their carefully calculated strategy having failed entirely in the face of Damien's decisive, hard-won victory. As the Ashgrave delegation withdrew from the valley in tense, humiliated silence, Elena finally allowed herself to fully believe that the danger threatening her family for so many years had truly, finally come to an end. The weeks following Damien's decisive victory brought a kind of peace Elena had not felt in over 5 years. The formal resolution of the sanctioned confrontation carried significant legal weight throughout the Northern Territories, and word spread quickly among the various packs that the Ashgrave elders had suffered a humiliating, binding defeat in their attempt to claim Ren. Their influence and reputation weakened considerably in the aftermath, leaving them with little practical ability to pursue further action, even had they wished to attempt it. Damien's injuries from the confrontation healed steadily under careful attention, his considerable wolf strength allowing for a faster recovery than an ordinary human might have managed, though Elena still fussed over him more than he strictly needed during those first difficult days, unable to fully release the fear that had gripped her during the fight itself. "I am perfectly fine," Damien told her one evening, amusement evident in his voice as Elena adjusted the bandages along his shoulder for what felt like the 10th time that week. "You do not need to worry so intensely, Elena." "I will worry exactly as much as I need to," Elena replied firmly, though a small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth, despite her stern tone. "I spent 5 years protecting our family alone. Allow me the indulgence of a little extra care now that I do not have to do it entirely by myself." Damien caught her hand gently, pressing a soft kiss against her palm. "Fair enough," he conceded warmly. "Though I should mention, watching you fuss over me quite this thoroughly is doing very little to discourage certain feelings I have been rediscovering rather intensely these past weeks." Elena felt heat rise pleasantly in her cheeks, old easy warmth finally returning fully between them after years of careful distance and cautious rebuilding. "Is that so?" she said softly, leaning down to press her forehead gently against his. "That is very much so," Damien confirmed, his voice low and warm, all the careful restraint of recent weeks finally giving way entirely to the deep, unshaken love that had never truly faded, despite everything keeping them apart. Their relationship, rebuilt slowly and carefully over the preceding weeks, deepened rapidly in the peaceful aftermath of the resolved threat, old wounds finally beginning to heal properly, now that the constant weight of danger no longer hung over every quiet moment they managed to share together. Ren, meanwhile, flourished remarkably in her new home, her early fear and uncertainty giving way steadily to genuine happiness as she settled fully into pack life. She continued her training with Fenwick, developing increasingly impressive control over her considerable natural strength, while also simply enjoying, for the first time, the security of a childhood no longer overshadowed by constant hidden danger. She made quick friends among the pack's other children, her natural warmth and perceptive kindness winning over even the more cautious among them within just a few weeks. She grew close as well with Callan, who took obvious delight in teaching her small, practical skills whenever their schedules allowed, treating her with the easy, affectionate familiarity of an honorary uncle rather than simply Damien's trusted advisor. Elena, watching her daughter thrive so completely in this new, secure environment, felt the last remnants of her old, protective anxiety finally begin to ease. The careful, isolated life she had built in Millbrook had served its purpose, protecting Ren through the most dangerous years of early vulnerability. But this, she realized watching Ren laugh freely among a growing circle of friends and trusted family, this was the life she had always truly wanted for her daughter, full and connected and safe, in a way that isolation alone could never have provided. 3 months after the confrontation, on a warm evening filled with soft golden light, Damien led Elena out to the same quiet garden where they had first begun rebuilding their relationship weeks earlier. Ren, apparently in on some secret plan Elena remained entirely unaware of, had been sent off earlier that evening with Callan for what she had cheerfully described as an important surprise mission. "What exactly is happening?" Elena asked, amused suspicion evident in her voice, as Damien led her toward the old stone fountain at the garden's heart, the very spot where they had first reached toward reconciliation months before. Damien turned to face her fully, his expression a careful mixture of nervousness and deep, unwavering certainty that immediately caught Elena's full attention. "Elena," he began, his voice steady despite the obvious emotion behind it, "5 years ago, you stood in a courtyard, very much like this one, and told me you still loved me before walking away to protect our daughter from a danger I did not yet understand. That single sentence carried me through 5 of the hardest years of my life, and it never once stopped being true for either of us, no matter the distance or the silence between us." Elena felt her breath catch, understanding beginning to dawn as Damien reached carefully into his jacket pocket. "I do not want to spend another single day pretending that our bond, our love, our family, means anything less than absolutely everything to me," Damien continued, lowering himself carefully onto one knee before her, a simple, elegant ring catching the soft evening light in his outstretched hand. "Elena Voss, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife, properly and permanently, in front of our entire pack and our remarkable daughter, so that no distance or danger ever separates us again?" Elena's tears fell freely now, 5 years of grief and longing and careful hope, finally converging into overwhelming, joyful certainty. "Oh, yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion despite the wide, radiant smile spreading across her face. "Yes, absolutely yes." Damien rose quickly, sweeping her into a fierce, joyful embrace as the ring slid perfectly into place, both of them laughing and crying in equal measure amid the soft golden light of the garden. It was only then that Elena noticed the quiet gathering of pack members who had assembled discreetly near the garden's entrance, Ren, standing proudly at the very front, beside a grinning Callan, having clearly known exactly what surprise mission she had been sent to help orchestrate all along. "Finally," Ren announced with cheerful satisfaction, breaking away from Callan to run toward her parents, "you two stopped being stubborn." Elena laughed through her remaining tears, scooping her daughter into the joyful embrace alongside Damien, the small family finally, completely whole after everything they had survived together. Their wedding took place several weeks later, a joyful celebration attended by the entire Blackthorn pack, along with several allied territories who had supported them through the recent crisis. Ren served proudly as an integral part of the ceremony, beaming with obvious happiness as she watched her parents finally, formally commit to the future they had both fought so hard and sacrificed so much to protect. Standing together afterward beneath a sky full of stars, Elena resting comfortably in Damien's arms with Ren settled happily between them, Elena reflected on the long, difficult journey that had brought them to this moment. 5 years of careful hiding, painful sacrifice, and quiet, desperate hope had finally given way to exactly the future she had once feared she might never live to see. "I still love you," she whispered softly, echoing the words she had spoken in heartbreak so many years before, now carrying an entirely different, joyful weight. Damien pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, his voice warm with quiet, unshakable certainty. "And I will spend the rest of our lives together, making certain you never have reason to whisper those words in goodbye again." Beside them, Ren looked up at her parents with a wide, satisfied smile. Finally, completely surrounded by the family and safety she had unknowingly fought so hard to earn from the very first moments of her remarkable life. Their story, born from heartbreak and sacrifice, had finally found its way to the ending it always deserved, together, whole, and unshakably certain of the love that had carried them through everything standing between them.